New York. Chapter 1. Edith, 1997. It's our second day in New York City. We're with Dennis Lomack. Mom's in St. Vincent's, resting. She has recently done something very stupid, and I'm the one who found her. Dennis has been taking us around town, trying to get our minds off of everything, trying to make up for the last decade. Tonight, he brought Mae and me along on a date with a redhead to a dance recital. Mom would take us sometimes into New Orleans to see the Nutcracker, but this isn't like that. We're in the basement of a church. It's cramped and damp. On a stage, a woman in a white sundress dances by herself. She looks like a feral cat. Her rib cage shows on the sides and down the front. She has thick, dark hair that sways at her waist as she moves. The stage is covered in folding chairs, and she dances with her eyes squeezed shut. She seems aware of nothing, banging her legs and arms and not even noticing. The chairs collapse and fall around her, and she keeps going. She slows and cocks her head at an angle, as if she's listening for something, then makes little twitchy movements with her hands. Even from my seat, I can smell her dirty hair. It wafts with each spin. She blurs, and I realize I'm crying. I don't know why. That's not true. I do. It's because she reminds me so much of Mom. The way she dances, so desperate, but also so closed off. She isn't dancing for us. She's somewhere deep inside herself, and the seats could be empty, and she'd still dance like this. Mae looks terrified. I squeeze her hand, but she doesn't notice. I don't know Dennis well enough to guess what he's feeling. Probably nothing. In the dark theater, his face looks like it's carved out of a rock. His date has fallen asleep on his shoulder. Outside, Dennis pries the redhead off his neck, twirls out from under her, and puts her in a cab. It's almost a dance, too, the way he does it. His movements are so calculated. Obviously, he has a lot of practice getting rid of people. As the cab pulls away, the woman looks at us through the glass like she's a sad golden retriever. Mae waves. I already don't remember her name. Rachel? Rebecca? It doesn't matter. I doubt we'll ever see her again. We walk back to Dennis's apartment in silence. He walks between us, holding our elbows. It's a long way, 30 or 40 blocks. The air is cold, and most of the stores are closed with the metal grates down over the windows. The benches we pass have men lying on them. Some have sleeping bags, but others are just wrapped in newspapers. The ones who didn't get a bench lie in doorways or on the ground. Dennis leads us around the men in silence. I've never seen so many homeless people before. At an intersection, a group of women walks by us, laughing and licking ice cream cones. They don't even look at the people on the ground as they step over them. I'm sorry, Dennis says. His words hang there. Mae and I glance at each other. I wish he'd be a little more specific about what it is exactly that he's sorry about. At the apartment, we sit at the kitchen table to have tea. When I think about the woman swaying on the stage, I start to cry again. Mae strokes my hair, rubs my temples with her cold fingers. Dennis hovers behind her. He helps her out of her coat, tries to help me with mine, but I shake him off. What have we done? I say. How could we have left her? Please calm down, he says, and hands me a napkin. I blow my nose. His face is stiff and unreadable, but his hand is shaken as he pours water into our mugs, and he has to steady it so he won't spill. I look away at the box of teas Mae is holding. I don't like that his hand is shaken. He has no right to lose it. I take a deep breath and focus on the box. It's wooden with carvings of elephants and full of tea bags. Ginger lemon, rooibos, acai berry. Shit I've never heard of. Mom only drinks coffee. I pick one that smells the least like grass. I bet the box was left here by a woman. just like the small sock we found balled up in the corner of our room. Dennis wedges his chair between the table and the refrigerator. He buries his fingertips in his beard as he stares at us. I look away, but I see Mae staring back at him. He shakes my shoulder until soon I'm looking at him too. It's strange because his eyes are the same eyes that I see in the mirror. I feel momentarily hypnotized, like I'm outside my body. "Listen to me," he says, and his voice is wet. "I understand that you might feel, at first, that I'm a stranger. But I'm not a stranger. I am your father." And then his rigid face collapses, and he pulls us into his chest and holds us until the tea gets cold. Mae. This is the kind of thing my mother liked to do. She'd pick a person and follow them for hours. Through the mall, to the garage, to their house. Once, we drove all night through the woods with our headlights off to somebody's hunting cabin. Sometimes, if it was during the day, she would let Edie come too, though when Edie was there it would become something fun and toothless. A game where she and Edie would share a bag of Twizzlers in the front seat and speculate about the people we were following. But when it was just Mom and me at night, the trees and swamp rushing past the windows in the dark, it was not a game at all. I was submerged in Mom's reality. Sometimes she'd get out of the car and I'd have to go with her. Once, we walked for a long time down an overgrown path to somebody's deer stand. The air was thick and cold. The sound of crickets and tree frogs was deafening. I was 10, maybe 11, and I remember this unpleasant recurring feeling I'd get every few steps, like I was waking up and waking up and waking up. The deer stand was a plywood shack on stilts. I don't know if we stumbled on it or if Mom had been leading us there deliberately. I followed her up the ladder because I was scared to stay on the ground alone. It was like a treehouse, but it smelled of mold and blood. Mom went through an entire book of matches, reading the headlines of old newspapers covering the floor. We got lost on the way back to the car. I was terrified that we would get shot at or chased by dogs. These things had happened too. It was light out by the time we got home, and then I had to go to school and pretend like nothing out of the ordinary had taken place. I'd have to try not to fall asleep in class or draw attention to myself in any way. I don't know how much Edie knew. She would say I was Mom's favorite, but it's not true. It was more that Mom saw me as an extension of herself, while Edie was free to be her own person. Edie would be out with her friends, riding her bike, sunbathing, sneaking into movies, and I would be trapped upstairs in Mom's bedroom, buried under blankets despite the summer heat, my grandmother's fur coat draped over both of us. The coat was made from nutria, swamp rats, and Mom would make me lie under it with her for hours, sweating and itching, while she sucked the sleeves bald. Yes, Mom dragged me with her to every terrible place. I needed to get as far from her as I could. She was consuming me. That day when she tried to hang herself from the rafter in the kitchen, I'd been lying on my bedroom floor. My mind was a radio tuned to her station, and her misery paralyzed me. I must have known what she was doing, but I did nothing to stop her. It was Edie who saved Mom's life. When Dad appeared out of nowhere to rescue us, it felt like he'd been summoned by magic. He took us out of school. I was a freshman and Edie was a junior, and brought us back with him to New York City. It was our first time out of Louisiana. We didn't know how long we'd be staying because everything was up in the air, but I understood that I was being given an opportunity to start over, and I wasn't going to squander it. Everything about Dad felt like déjà vu. I would see an object and feel inexplicably pulled towards it. A pair of brown leather shoes at the back of his closet, for example. Worn soft and in need of resoling. I didn't remember them exactly, but my body did. I'd shut the closet door and hold them in the dark, cradling them in my arms. I didn't want Edie to know that I did these things, and it was hard to hide from her in such a small apartment. I loved that apartment. It was like a tight, dusty womb. Edie was constantly sneezing because the dust was so hard to clean out of all the books. The shelves in the living room overflowed onto the floor, and there were stacks of books everywhere. Against the walls, on top of the piano, under the kitchen table. Dad was a writer, so books found a way of multiplying in his apartment. He got new ones in the mail every day, mostly from young authors hoping for a blurb. A blurb from Dad went a long way. He was a cultural icon. Once he'd even been a clue on Jeopardy. Mom had been a writer too, a poet, though not nearly as well known. She read to us a lot. One of my earliest memories is sitting on the floor of the kitchen with Edie, watching as Mom towered above us with her eyes closed, swaying, stomping, intoning, her notebooks covering the counters. Sometimes she would send her work out to magazines and have Edie and me lick the envelopes for luck. She rarely got published. At some point, she stopped writing, and then eventually she stopped reading. The books became props. She could spend entire days sitting in the breakfast nook, staring glassily at some volume of poems open in her lap, her oily hair staining the shoulders of her nightgown. She would stare and never turn the pages. Her fingers, disconnected from the rest of her body, would be tapping something out against each other. Edith, 1997. The sound of traffic gets louder when I close my eyes. I bet this is what the ocean sounds like. Our bedroom is like a cabin on a cruise ship. It used to be Dennis's study, and it's so tight that if you're standing in the middle of the room, you have to make sure not to talk like an Italian, as our French teacher would have said, or you'll jam your fingers against the bunk bed or the dresser or the paper lantern. Mae is lying next to me on the bottom bunk. We're scared to leave each other's side. All night we take turns drifting in and out of sleep. It's like we're on a cruise ship, I whisper to her, but she doesn't open her eyes. She shakes her head, and her thick, dark hair falls over her face. She's like a little furnace when she sleeps. Her neck gets wet, and her hair sticks to it. Her hair is just like Mom's. When she turns away from me to face the wall, I comb it with my fingers and pretend it's Mom lying there with me. Sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. We've been here for almost a week, and the doctors still aren't saying anything. They tell Dennis that it's too early to know for sure. When I call, they tell me that they aren't authorized to discuss her condition with me. They treat me like a little kid, as if I haven't been the one taking care of her all these years. Dennis still hasn't told us when we're going back. I don't mind a break, but I'm on student council and on the homecoming and dance committees, and the longer we stay here, the more likely all that shit is going to be usurped. Plus, I miss Marcus, and it's only a matter of time before he gets usurped too, by one of the Laurens, or worse. I've asked Dennis, will we be back on the 3rd, the 4th? But he just smiles like an asshole and tells me how happy he is to have me here. I don't know how much more I can take of him following us around and making incessant observations about stupid shit. How we hold our spoons, how we drink our water. We are so similar to him. Oh, the wonder of genetics. I wouldn't be surprised if right now it turned out he's actually standing on the other side of our bedroom door, listening to us sleep, making notes on how similar our sleeping sounds are to his own. Maybe he can put that in his next book. We are such exciting material. Little mirrors in which he can stare at himself even more. Don't you think it's strange? I whisper loudly. That Dennis never took any interest in us for 12 years, and now suddenly he can't get enough? If he's on the other side of the door, I hope he hears me. Mae doesn't open her eyes, but I can tell she's awake. Anyway, I already know what she thinks. She doesn't think it's strange at all. When I brought it up before, she defended him. She was only 2 when he left, so what does she know? I was 4. I actually remember it. I remember missing him, waiting for him by the front window every day like a dog. He never called, not on birthdays or Christmas. He never sent letters or postcards. He's this famous writer or whatever, and I have no idea what his handwriting even looks like. And then there's also what Mom told us. Even when we were little, she'd talk very openly with us, since we were all she had. She'd tell us how he'd taken advantage of her youth, and how he'd been jealous and rageful, and slept with all her friends, not even because he wanted to, or was particularly attracted to any of them, but because he didn't want her to have friends. And she didn't have friends, not really. She had Doreen, and she had us, and we hadn't been enough. "This isn't going to last," I whisper. I don't want her to get her hopes up, only to have them crushed. "As soon as we go back home, we'll never hear from him again." Mae is so bad at pretending to be asleep. She holds her breath. That's what gives her away. I don't say anything else, and soon the sound of traffic fills the room until it feels like I'm floating on it. I drift off. I'm back home, in my own room. Mom is fine. I hear her in the shower, singing. See? She's fine. I knew she'd be fine. Her singing turns shrill. Sirens wake me up. Mae is by the window. The lights from an ambulance 7 stories below are making her face a blue and then red mask. "Mae," I whisper, but she doesn't budge. She goes into trances sometimes. That's why the kids at school called her spooks. "Mae," I say again, and put my hands on her shoulders. We both watch someone on the street below get strapped into a stretcher. There was a torrential downpour the day I found Mom in the kitchen. The EMTs and firemen left puddles all over the carpet when they carried her out. It was like God made me and Marcus get into a fight so that I'd come home early from his lake house and find her. Mae says that she doesn't believe in God, but how else would you explain my being there in time? Just 5 minutes later, and she would have died. I can't imagine her dead. It's like an eclipse, where if you look directly at it, you'd go blind. She hadn't really wanted to die. I know this for a fact. You know how I know? Because she'd put the hot water on and set the percolator up to make coffee. The whole wall was wet with condensation, and the kettle was still whistling when I found her. I don't know how Mae hadn't heard anything. She must have been in one of her trances. I walk Mae back to the bottom bunk and tuck her in. She reaches over and strokes my face. "Don't cry," she says, and closes her eyes. I hadn't realized I was crying. Tears have been leaking out of me since we got here, like my face is incontinent. "I'm not," I say, and wipe them with her hair. "Don't you wish it could go back to how it was?" I ask. Before this happened, before Mom got depressed. She wasn't always sad. Sometimes she was happier than anybody I've ever seen. She would laugh, doubled over, unable to stop, and we would laugh too, even if we didn't get what was so funny. And then there were other times, when she wasn't happy or angry or sad, when she was just Mom, when she would take us to the park or to the parades, and when she'd stay up late sewing us elaborate Mardi Gras costumes. Mae doesn't answer me, turns to face the wall. Finally, when I'm almost asleep, I hear her say, "Sometimes it feels like you and I grew up in different houses." Mae. The first couple of weeks, Dad didn't let us out of his sight. He'd take us on epic walks, trying to cram in as much as he could to make up for lost time. We'd covered hundreds of blocks on foot. He said that when he moved back to New York, he missed us so much that it felt like his internal organs were crawling with fire ants, and walking was what brought him back to sanity. It wouldn't have occurred to us to walk in Metairie. There was nowhere to go, and you couldn't get very far without eventually ending up where you started or hitting the interstate. There were the terrifying night walks through swamps and woods with Mom, but that was its own thing. In New York, we walked like pilgrims, and when our shoes wore down, Dad bought us fancy sneakers, designed to mimic the strut of a Maasai warrior. We'd wear them as we walked from the cloisters to the southernmost tip of Battery Park, stepping around junkies nodding out on the sidewalks of the Lower East Side, sampling dumplings in Chinatown and pizza in Little Italy, fingering the bolts of fabric in the Fashion District, and buying bouquets in the flower district that wilted by the time we got home. We'd walk through neighborhoods right as schools were getting out. Girls would pour into the street, wearing similar uniforms to what we had at St. Ursula's. Gray and green plaid skirts and button-down white shirts. Though, of course, these girls made them look a lot more sophisticated. We'd see them standing in long lines outside bakeries in Greenwich Village, rummaging around in their big, fancy purses. Dad would try to steer us away from those girls because seeing them would inevitably put Edie in a foul mood. "You've basically kidnapped us!" she would scream at him, and some of the girls would turn and watch us uncertainly, not knowing whether to take her accusation seriously. Once, she took off her new sneakers and threw them at him. Dad looked so befuddled and surprised that it only made Edie angrier. "When are we going home?" she screamed. And the only way to calm her was to invoke the doctors and Mom's health. Then she'd begrudgingly settled down, and after several blocks, put her shoes back on. My favorite was when Dad would take us on ghost tours of all the places from his childhood that had been effaced, places where he had lived and gone to the movies and drank malts and played pinball. I liked seeing another layer of the city under the immediately visible one. Metairie was a static swamp. Nothing there felt like it could ever change. One time, he took us to Morningside Park to look at the caves he'd camped in to protest attempts to segregate the park. Columbia had wanted to build a gym where there were 2 separate entrances for whites and coloreds. Anytime he talked about the civil rights movement, Edie would forget she was supposed to be angry and would listen to him with her mouth hanging open.
Letter from Dennis Lomack to Marianne Louise McLean. April 24, 1968. Dear M, I sat down with the intention of working on a novel, but everything I write turns into a letter to you. I'm under your spell, girl. Why fight it? Fred and I are in Morningside Park. The pigs are patrolling the park's perimeter, but they won't do anything. Even the mayor knows we'll write. We're drunk and singing, celebrating Columbia's capitulation. Goodbye, Jim Crow. Fred spilled our water bucket over the wood so it wouldn't light. Poor Fred. No depth perception. I had to climb down and look for more wood. From below, the view is very satisfying. Caves pockmark the side of the cliff, each one with a campfire burning in it. The side of the cliff is thus transformed into a primordial skyscraper. A caveman skyscraper. This phrase came to me in your father's voice. Oh, how I wish you could both see it. It's better than a sit-in. It's a camp-in. It's a cave-in. This isn't Mississippi. Not on our watch, etc., etc. How was your father? I've been meaning to write him. I heard from Anne that the case against him is a mess. A total farce, though she did not go into specifics. I'm happy to talk to my sister for advice. She's a lawyer, you know. I just saw her earlier this evening, as a matter of fact. She brought us pork and cabbage in that drip of hers, Stuart. Friends came over from the cave next to us. 2 Puerto Rican sisters. Stuart tried to talk to them about Gandhi, but they were not impressed. They left. Stuart says if he could kill me and wear my skin, he would. Stuart's face is what you'd call a bouquet of pimples. He blames this for his poor luck with women. Why my sister tolerates him is beyond me. Mosquitoes are flocking to the candle, so I'm going to blow it out. Good night, my little M.
Edith, 1997. I'm too old, Dennis says and waves us on. He's standing by the barbecuers in the grass below. Mae and I climb under the railing and crawl along a narrow ledge to the caves along the side of the cliff. I don't look down. The caves have small openings. As we crawl into them, our hands brush against dirt and trash. Candy wrappers. Or is it condom wrappers? Dennis is shouting directions at us from below. To the left! To the left! He's saying. I stick my head out and see he's pointing to the cave next to us. That's the one he camped in back in the day. We climb over to it. I hoist Mae in, and then she pulls me up. The cave is deeper than the others and darker. It takes a while for my eyes to adjust, and then I see an outline of a figure. I can feel Mae tense, but before she can do anything, I cover her mouth with my hand. There's a man very close to us, asleep. He is naked, lying on top of a sleeping bag. Even in the dark, I can see his dick. It's draped on his stomach, looking directly at us with its eye. Mae and I nearly fall out of the cave, crawling backward. I bet it's the first dick she's ever seen. "What happened?" Dennis says. Mae and I are both out of breath. Her face is smudged from where I covered her mouth. A Snickers wrapper is hanging off her knee, and Dennis peels it off. "We saw a snake," I tell him. I don't know why I lie. It just comes out. "Oh," he says. "Was it green and yellow?" I nod. "A garter snake. Don't worry, they're harmless," he says. There's a woman standing next to him. Not the one from the theater, a different one. The way she smiles at us makes her look like a horse. When she tries to compliment Mae on her hair, Mae growls. Mae. Dad had a lot of women. It was better not to encourage them. The worst was when they tried to act motherly, and then it felt like some awful community theater production where they were auditioning for a part that didn't really exist. Edie and I both made a point of being rude to them, though we had different reasons. I had finally been given a father, and I didn't want to share him, while Edie thought these women were an insult to Mom. I don't think Dad knew how to keep all the women at bay. His whole life, he got a lot of female attention. Growing up, he was the youngest, and his mother and sister doted on him. And then, as an adult, he was handsome and charismatic, tall enough to have to stoop through doorways, talented and famous. Of course women liked him. But it didn't seem like he took any of them very seriously. He was completely focused on Edie and me. Being in the center of someone's world like this was intoxicating. The way he looked at us, I've never experienced anything like it. One night when Edie was asleep, I snuck out of our room and crept up to Dad's door. I stood there for a while, gathering my courage to knock. I needed to tell him that I couldn't go back, that I couldn't leave him, but I was afraid to say anything in front of my sister. I was nervous to break rank and go behind her back. I remember, as I tapped on his door, it pushed open, and I found him sitting at his writing desk, staring at a photograph. I startled him, and he quickly slid the picture into a drawer. "What are you doing up?" he asked. I lost my nerve. I didn't know what to say. And what if Edie was right? What if his love for us was an illusion, and my words would expose this and scare him off? So I said nothing. But I didn't have to. "Come here," he said, and pulled me onto his lap. "Are you scared?" he asked me. I nodded, and he kissed me on the forehead. "Who wouldn't be?" he said. Edith, 1997. My two beautiful daughters. My beautiful, beautiful girls. Dennis says at breakfast. My shoulder is warm under his hand. His eyes are soft, like we're his baby birds. I look at Mae looking at him, and I can see things, important things, slowly shifting around in her like plate tectonics. I'm not gonna lie. I also felt a moment of sudden completeness when he touched me, like the wires in my bullshit alarm had been cut. But at least I recognize it for what it is. 2 weeks have gone by since Mom disappeared into the hospital, and we're betraying her already. "I thought I would take you to the Met today," he says. The phone rings, but he keeps smiling at us. I squirm out from under his hand. It's Marcus, probably, calling me back. I've left him 3 messages. That, or one of Dennis's ladies. So many ladies. They call and call. One showed up the other day in a trench coat with nothing on underneath. She'd been out of the country and came straight from the airport to surprise him. Surprise! She couldn't even sit down, just held the coat closed tight around her neck with one hand as she shook our hands with the other. I almost felt bad for her. "Hello," I say into the phone. It's a male voice. "Could I speak to Mr. Lomack, please?" It's the doctor, I think. I hand Dennis the phone. I watch his face as he listens. "Yes," Dennis says. "How is she doing?" He looks down at his hands. "Yes," he says. "Yes?" He turns from us, and the cord on the phone wraps around his back. "What about the medication?" he says. "I see," he says. "Yes." His voice gives away nothing. My heart is beating in my throat. "I'm sorry to hear that," he says. But he doesn't sound particularly sorry. I can't see his face. What is he sorry to hear? Mae shifts in her seat, and the chair creaks. I must be giving her a mean look because her lips are quivering. She's sensitive. That's what Mom always says. Be careful with your sister. She's so sensitive. I smile at her, or try to, then take a deep breath. "Yes," Dennis says again, about 3,000 times. "They're keeping Mom there against her will. She's probably tied to a bed, screaming. She's lost her voice. That's why they won't let me talk to her. She has no voice." I picture her face screaming and no sound coming out. This scares me, so I take Mae's hand. "Ow," she says, and rubs where I touched her. She can be a real brat sometimes. Dennis hangs up the phone. His eyes are shining, and he doesn't say anything until he sits down at the table with us. "The doctors think it would be best," he says, burying his fingers in his beard, "if you moved here on a somewhat permanent basis. Your mother is not doing well. She needs more time." "No," I say. Dennis nods. "I know this isn't what you were expecting," he says. "What about school? We can't just leave in the middle of the spring quarter. We can go back and live there by ourselves. I'm 16. Who do you think has been taking care of things this whole time?" "Legally, you couldn't do that," he says. "We can stay with Doreen." Doreen is like Mom's sister. Not biological, but they grew up together. She owes it to us. "She hasn't offered." I try to stay calm, because I know that is the only way to win an argument, but I can hear my voice growing shrill. "I don't agree to this." Mae interrupts. She glares at me and says, "I think you're being very selfish." It feels like she has reached across the table and slapped me.
Dennis Lomax's Journal, 1970. Last night I began something big, alive. I don't want to speak too soon, but maybe, finally, a book. I typed, and Marianne lay on the mattress on the floor, watching me. With her, I am an open glove welcoming a hand. It is her energy working through me, I'm certain of it. I wrote all night. Outside, it rained. Marianne lay on her back, raised her arm, squinted at her ring, fell asleep. Yesterday, my sister came into the city for a visit, and as we were passing City Hall, I felt compelled to get married. We bought carnations, dyed bright blue from the deli across the street. "Look," Marianne had said, running her thumb along the stems, veined like arms. We stopped a tourist on the street, asked him to take a picture of us with his camera. He promised to mail it. And since our marriage, the urge to write has consumed me. Beneath all my words, like subway clatter, my wife, my life, my wife. It was already light out when I stopped and crawled in beside her. I needed more of her to keep going. "They bit me all night long," she told me, sleepily showing me her arm. A row of small red welts. The bedbugs live between the floorboards and inside the electrical sockets. "I'll bite you too," I said, and I did. Then after, in the bathroom mirror, as I washed my face, I caught sight of my earlobe. 2 uneven lines, marks from her crooked front teeth. And again the zap of desire. I ran back to bed, unbuttoned the blouse from the bottom that she had begun buttoning from the top. She's shy, but about all the wrong things. I moved her hands off her breasts and kissed her wrists, pinned her down. And then, her whispered refrain, "You can save me?" For which there is only one answer. Yes. Of course, yes.
Edith, 1997. Dennis and Mae are banging pots around in the kitchen. He's teaching her how to make dumplings from scratch. It's his grandmother's recipe from Poland. I guess that makes her our great-grandmother. I did most of the cooking back home and kept the batteries out of the smoke alarm by the kitchen because of Mom and Mae. All our pots had outlines from burnt rice on the bottoms from when they would try to make red beans and rice. I was thinking about that yesterday when we got a special tour of the Metropolitan Museum of Art by some woman Dennis was/is/will be putting it into. And she was showing us the swirly night sky in a painting by Vincent van Gogh. It looked just like the bottoms of all our pots in Metairie. It makes me sad. Those pots, stacked and unused in the cabinets of our empty house. I don't know how much longer I can take being away. I heard someone once say that if you visualize what you want, like really picture it with all the details, it'll come true. Sort of like a prayer. So, I try it. I close my eyes and concentrate. I'm not in this cramped shithole anymore. Instead, I'm back home, standing in our living room. To the left is the shelf with the gourd sculptures filled with my grandfather's ashes. In front is the window with its lace curtains. It's the middle of the day, and light is streaming in, casting patterns on the green velvet couch and the coffee table. I try to imagine the smell of the neighbor's trees. It creeps in, despite the closed windows and the humming of the air conditioner. Those trees were just starting to bud when we left. By now, they should be in full bloom. Little white flowers that smell like fish sticks. Last year, people complained and signed petitions to have them cut down, but I liked them. I've always liked those kind of smells. Fish, skunk, gasoline, armpits, dirt. Mom and Mae are in the other room. I stretch my arms out and walk towards them. But then, as I'm getting close, as I'm almost at the threshold of our kitchen, the floor creaks and ruins everything. Our house has thick carpet. The floor never creaks. I try to stand still, hoping that if I focus hard, I can start again where I left off, but it's not working. I can't figure out how to teleport entirely, how to be in Metairie for more than a few seconds at a time. I open my eyes, and there is Mae, the real one, standing in the doorway, watching me. She has flour on her face and on her shirt. She's holding the cordless phone. "It's Marcus," she says. "You want to take it?" I'm embarrassed, but then I think, why should I be? She doesn't know what I was doing. All she saw was me with my eyes closed. Mae always acts like she knows everything, but what does she really know? "Finally," I say into the phone, shutting the door in Mae's face. "Didn't your mom give you my messages? I'm calling you, aren't I?" He sounds annoyed. We broke up the day everything happened with Mom, but we got back together the day after, and the day after that, I came here. "So," he says, "what's up?" "I need your help," I say. "Okay." "I need to stay with you." He doesn't say anything for a moment, so I rush to fill the silence. "I don't have anywhere else to go. Dennis wants me to move to New York, and Mom isn't bitter yet." "I'll ask my parents," he says. "Please," I say, because I don't think he will. "I'll ask them." "I could live in your guest room," I say. "Okay," he says. It sounds like there are people in the background, voices, laughter. I feel a pang. "Where are you?" I ask. "At the lake house," he says. "Who's all there?" I ask. "Lauren B., Lauren S., and Drunk Mike." "Why are you hanging out with the Laurens?" "Don't," he says. But then someone grabs the phone from him. "Edie," Mike slurs. "Why aren't you here?" I hear Marcus wrestling the phone away from him. "He doesn't know?" I ask Marcus. "He probably forgot," Marcus says. "So, you'll ask your parents?" I say. "Jesus," he says. "I said I would." He sounds so annoyed with me. Neither of us say anything. I sniffle loudly into the phone. I know he can hear it and that he feels bad because his voice goes low, and I feel like it's Marcus I'm talking to again, not this other person he has become over the last few months. "Edie, come on, stop. I'm sorry. Stop crying." "I want to go home," I say. Someone picks up the phone on his end and starts dialing. "Hello? Hello?" It's Marcus's father. "Hi, Dr. Terrio," I say. "Hello? Hello? Marcus, is that you? I need the telephone. The hospital is paging me," he says, seeming not to have heard me. "I'll call you later," Marcus says, and hangs up. I hold the phone for a moment, listening to the dial tone. In the other room, Mae is laughing. It's a weird sound. Ugly. I come out into the living room and see Dennis on the ground, with Mae standing on his back, Bend your knees. Arms out. Eyes on the horizon. He's shouting the commands as he wriggles around and bucks under her. They're both covered in flour. Mae is trying to balance, but she's doubled over with that hideous laughter. I can't, she gasps. I'm teaching Mae how to surf, Dennis says when he sees me. They look about as idiotic as this sounds. Stop sticking your butt out like that. You look like you're about to take a dump, I tell her. She keeps smiling, but doesn't look at me. Dennis yells, "Wave!" and bucks under her. She squeals as she flies off and lands on the couch. You want to try surfing? He asks me. He's gotta be fucking kidding. This is the kind of shit he should have been doing 12 years ago when he abandoned us, not now when I'm 16. You know, we've never even seen the ocean, I tell him. But how would he know this? He's a complete stranger. I knock a stack of books off the coffee table for emphasis, and there's a cloud of dust. Dennis gets up, streaks of dirt on his belly and legs, flour in his hair. You don't know anything about us, I try to say, but I can't stop sneezing. Mae. I think Edie was so scared of Dad leaving again that she wanted to preempt it. She wanted to drive him away so that it could feel like she had some say in the matter. Well, she's done it, I remember thinking after Edie threw her first fit. Every little mean thing Edie said, I would think, this is it. Because everything in New York felt so precarious. We weren't in school. We had no routine. We didn't know anyone. We were just floating there. Even though I'd get mad at her, I'd hold her until I could feel her rumbling rage subside, until finally, whatever it was inside her would grow silent and still. People who didn't know Edie very well were always surprised to find out that she had a temper. Because of her voice, and also because she had this look like a blind baby animal, a leggy calf or a freshly hatched chick, all bones and matted fluffs of yellow hair. One of my earliest memories, though, is of her wailing on me. She claims not to remember, but whenever she was feeling contrite, she'd pet the tiny white scar in my eyebrow with her finger. I don't have it anymore, but it was over my right eye. She'd given it to me by kicking me in the face with an ice skate. I remember after an argument, when I told her to stop making trouble with Dad, how she took a handful of my hair and jammed it in my mouth, enough for me to choke, and said, "He's going to leave us again. He's going to leave us as many times as we let him." In that moment, I believed her, despite Dad doing everything he could to convince us otherwise. Like when she threw a fit because she wanted to go to the beach, and within minutes, Dad was in his swim trunks, carrying towels, herding us onto the Q train to Brighton Beach. It was a long subway ride, and because it was the middle of the day, I remember the car being empty. It had felt like it was our private train, and even though Edie was trying not to enjoy it, I know she did. It was my first trip to see the ocean, and I didn't even know that I was dying to see it until I was on my way there. People are always surprised when I tell them this because we lived by the Gulf, but the coast of Louisiana is all swamp. We'd go up to Lake Pontchartrain, but there were no ocean beaches. For that, you'd have to drive out to Alabama or Florida, and we'd never left the state. Mom traveled, but she never took us. She'd disappear for weeks at a time, leave us with Doreen, or when Doreen got sick of us, with the Wassersteins, an older couple who watched crime shows all day and fed us nothing but hot dogs. Edie and I loved to hate the Wassersteins. In a recent show, I tried to recreate the feeling of that first trip to Brighton Beach with Dennis, but it was hard to capture the intense and simple joy I'd felt. It was windy and full of seagulls, and the sand was mixed with wrappers and trash, but I didn't notice any of that. I was bowled over by the horizon line. All that water stretching out forever, and those waves. The way the water gathered itself and suddenly rose up. The force of it as it pulled the sand out from under my feet. It was cold, but of course we all went in. Edie looked like an animated broomstick in a bikini. The coldness of the water just made her broomstickier, hopping from foot to foot. the cold water was a shock to our systems. It made us momentarily euphoric. Our teeth practically fell out, they were chattering so much, but it was really lovely. The Atlantic Ocean in March. After the beach, we went to a Russian dumpling restaurant and met Aunt Rose, our dad's sister. We didn't even know we had an aunt. Mom had never mentioned her. She looked like Edie, if Edie had been left out to sour. It must have been strange for my sister to be surrounded suddenly by so many approximations of herself. Edith, 1997. I'm sick of strangers acting as if they are continuing some sort of conversation with me, as if they just stepped into the other room for a minute, as opposed to, abandoning Mae and me completely for over a decade. With Dennis, you'd think he'd tripped and fell into a time portal. Oops, I forgot all about my daughters and made my wife go crazy. My bad. His sister is just like him. Looking at her face makes me want to die young. I didn't think I'd get to see you again, Rose says with a quavering voice. And, you probably don't remember me. But she says it like she thinks we should. When the waitress brings Dennis extra dumplings on the house, Rose rolls her eyes, but you can tell she takes some weird pleasure in her brother having this effect on women. She keeps reaching over and picking food out of his beard. If he'd gotten a steak, I bet she would have insisted on cutting it up into small pieces for him. You poor girls, she says after we finish the appetizers. She tries to take my hand, but I quickly move it onto my lap. Your mother, what that woman put you through. Mae is sucking the salt water out of her hair, not saying anything. She's not the one who abandoned us, I say, and glare at Dennis. He stares back at me. Your father did not abandon you. For a public defender, Aunt Rose is not a very good liar. She blushes in the same blotchy, grotesque way that I do, and noticing this makes my ears burn. I tell her. Mae doesn't remember, so go ahead and tell her. But I was there, Rose. He never called or wrote. I waited for him for months. I'm sorry, he says. You're right. I'm sorry. You can be mad at me as long as you need to be. Like I need his permission. Rose grabs his sleeve. It's not right for them to think that. She turns to us. Marianne drove him away. It's how she wanted it. Your mother. Stop it. Dennis slams his fist against the table, hard enough to make the dishes rattle. We're all silent. Rose takes a sip of her ice water, her eyes thick with tears. Then Dennis says, I did a horrible thing. I can only hope that eventually you'll forgive me. The words come out practiced, like he's been saying them every morning in front of the mirror for the last 12 years. He is staring at me, waiting for my reaction, and when I don't give him one, he stands abruptly. Rose tries to stand too, but he pushes her back down into her chair. He goes outside to smoke a cigarette. We watch him in silence through the window. His back heaves. The smoke appears in a cloud over his shoulder, like a thought bubble. Rose dabs her eyes with a napkin. I finish the dumplings on Dennis's plate out of spite, shove them all violently in my mouth, try not to gag as they slide down my throat. The waitress is watching us. Mae gets up slowly and goes outside. Through the glass, I watch her comfort Dennis. She looks so gentle and serious. If you'd only seen what your mother put him through, Rose murmurs to me, but I don't take the bait. She gestures to the waitress for the check. My poor Denny. Rose. The first thing that struck me when I saw my nieces, after all those years, was how much Mae looked like her mother. It was uncanny. That pale skin, that long, thick, black hair. Girls used to get burned at the stake for looking like that. My choice of words. All I meant was that Marianne had been a witch. A witch and a bitch. And in the end, even she didn't want to live with herself. I remember Denny writing to me to say he'd met the girl he was going to marry, but that he would have to wait a while. He fell in love with her instantly when she was a kid. Not in a perverted way, but he just knew. He waited for her to grow up, and then he married her. How sad that I had not been able to help those girls when they were little and living with Marianne. But Denny told me not to meddle. It was his life. What could I do? Especially after they moved back to New Orleans. Stuart and I couldn't have children, and when the girls were born, I thought of them as my own. I know it drove Marianne crazy, especially when the first one came out looking nothing like her. She said I was like one of those parasitic birds who hides her eggs in other birds' nests. It was a joke, sort of, but that's what her sense of humor was like. Not exactly ha-ha, always an edge to it. She would say Denny took advantage of her. She was 17, and her father had just died, and she was left all alone, a barefoot orphan. For God's sake, Denny saved her by marrying her. How is that taking advantage? He probably saved her life. He loved her since she was a child. It was very romantic. 32 and 17 seems like a big age difference, but it's only 15 years, and she was no innocent. He loved her more than anything. She broke him. She wore him down and broke him. Drove him out of their house. When he got off that plane, I fell to my knees. What she did to him. There was no Denny in front of me, just broken pieces. His neck was so thin it could barely hold up his head. His skin was the color of a corpse's. Stuart and I nursed him back to health, fed him, found him an apartment. But he couldn't write, and when we tried to introduce him to someone else, to get his mind off Marianne and the girls, it was no use. I don't mean to say there weren't other women. Sure, there were. Women loved him. How could they not? Talented, handsome, and now also damaged. Chapter 2. Letter from Amanda Singer to Detstevo Publishers. Dmitry Apesov, Detstevo Publishers, St. Petersburg, Russia. February 2nd, 1997. Dear Mr. Apesov, I am a PhD candidate at the University of Wisconsin, and I have a question that I was hoping you might be able to help me with. I am writing my dissertation on the work of the American writer Dennis Lomack. One of his books is a translation of Russian folk tales. There is one story in particular that fascinated me, but when I showed it to some colleagues in the Slavic Studies department, they did not think this particular variant sounded familiar. One of them suggested that I get in touch with you, as you are an expert in the field. The story is about a raven-haired beauty living in a hut perched atop a set of chicken feet. She spends her days making tapestries out of flowers. Then, one day, a boy and a girl who got lost in the woods appear on her doorstep. These children cast a spell and turn the beautiful woman into a bold witch, a Baba Yaga. She has no choice but to put the children in a cage and make soup out of them. Unlike the Baba Yagas of other stories, this one returns to her true, beautiful self after she eats the children. If you could point me to the original story that was being translated, I would be extremely grateful. I have attached the text and included a carton of Marlboro cigarettes. Sincerely, Amanda Singer. May. Dad would take us everywhere, even if he was only going downstairs to check the mail or to the post office up the street to buy stamps. He never left us alone at first. I would wake up sometimes and see him silhouetted in the doorway. I think he checked on us several times a night. Just being near him did something for me. As long as he was there, I almost didn't think about Mom, about the darkness that was in her and also in me, waiting. The only times I couldn't help thinking about her were in the moments right before falling asleep. There'd be the sensation of falling into her body, and then the hospital sounds. The other patients moaning, the stern voices of the nurses, the canned laughter from the television. But this lasted only a second, maybe 2, and then was obliterated by sleep. I'd never slept so well in my life. After years of being woken up in the night by Mom, forced to go God knows where, it was a relief to wake up in the same room as my sister, to hear lip smacking and light snores coming from the bunk below. We'd never shared a room before, unless we were at Doreen's or at the Wassersteins. I loved it. Since we weren't going to school, Dad made a point of filling our days with an assortment of enriching activities. Once, we spent a whole afternoon riding back and forth on the Staten Island ferry. Dad taught us a poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay. We were very tired. We were very merry. We had gone back and forth all night upon the ferry. The ferry didn't run all night, and I don't know that we were merry exactly, but joy found a way of squeezing through, even for Edie. Dad had bought us a netted sack of navel oranges, and we peeled them and sucked on the slices as we floated by the Statue of Liberty, watching her green face change in the light. It's how immigrants must have felt coming to Ellis Island. All that water around us like a baptism. Yes, it was a rebirth, the fresh start I'd been longing for. And then, on our way home from the ferry terminal in Battery Park, we saw a cardboard box with a Free Kittens sign in front of it. When we opened the box, though, there weren't any kittens. There was just one adult cat. We had assumed it was the mother, abandoned there after everyone had taken her kittens. White paws, white nose, white tail. Heartbreaking. We were instantly attached to it. I could picture the cat slinking around in Dad's apartment or spread across all our laps. It was that big. It would be the first thing that belonged to all 3 of us. One of the women Dad was dating met up with us in the park. It was Rivka, an art curator from Prague who had dyed pink hair that was so garish it managed to make her ugly face somehow transcend itself. She was so strange to look at that it got confusing after a while. Why it was you were staring at her. Was it because she was ugly or because she was beautiful? It was extreme to the point that it basically looped around the spectrum and became its opposite. Rivka insisted that Dad shouldn't let us touch the cat until it got its shots, so we brought the box to an animal hospital on 7th Avenue. The cat had not expected to be moved. It was difficult carrying a box for over a mile with a clawing and squirming cat inside it. Edie and I nearly dropped it at several intersections. We told the vet the whole story of its discovery, and he lifted the cat's tail and told us there was no way this cat was the mother of those kittens. It was a male. Maybe all the kittens had been taken, and he was a stray who just found the box. Though he was pretty fat for a stray. Maybe he had eaten all the kittens? We named him Cronus for the Greek god who ate all his children. We'd never been allowed to have a pet before. Mom had been allergic, or that is what she'd always said.
Charlie. I met Edie for the first time the day they brought home the cat. I'd been living in my grandmother's rent-controlled apartment directly below Dennis Lomack, but I'd been too shy to introduce myself. As a teenager, I devoured his books. At 16, everything I knew about sex came from them. I'd read them in a frenzy until the pages stuck together. It's funny because I looked at yesterday's bonfires recently, and it wasn't even that smutty. What strikes me now about that book is its sense of freedom, in the broadest sense. Maybe this is what inspired me to become an adventurer, an urban explorer. I usually take the stairs, but I didn't that evening because I saw Dennis Lomack and his daughters standing in the lobby, waiting for the elevator. The 2 girls were huddled over a cardboard box. What was in the box? It's in my nature to be curious about such things. And then Edie glanced up at me, and she had this look, and that's what gave me the nerve to finally introduce myself. "I'm Charlie, your downstairs neighbor," I whispered as I followed them into the elevator. And because they were looking at me strangely, I added, "I've lost my voice." This was a lie. I had not actually lost my voice. I stutter, and whispering is one of the few things I can do to hide this. I've whispered through job interviews. It's awkward, but it works. It's how I'd landed my gig as a substitute teacher. Before I got out, Edie lifted the cat up from the box and showed it to me with such pride. It was a beautiful cat, probably part coon cat, judging from its size. And Edie was beautiful too, of course. That night I went out on a shoot with an NYU film guy I met online. I was giving him a tour of the decommissioned subway stations, but I was distracted and kept getting us lost. I couldn't get that image of Edie holding the cat out of my head. Rivka. Poor Dennis. He tried very hard with them. We're a package deal, he said to me. A daughter on each arm. Not for me. Not my kind of package. I tried, but it did not work. That is okay. For some time it was very nice. I had a gallery. I traveled. I was busy. I did not fear being alone, but sometimes I became lonely. Dennis was gentle and constant. He did not demand from me emotionally. This is a hard quality to find in a man. I kept an apartment key in the flower pot, and he would come by a few times a week to make love. But after his daughters arrived, it became too difficult, and we made love only once. The daughters were in their room, and I begged him to take me on the kitchen floor. I pulled him down onto the ground. He was distracted. I knew it was to be our last time.
Edith, 1997. Dennis is leaning on our windowsill, smoking a cigarette. The ugly Czech woman is in the living room, moving around, dropping things, making her presence known, but he doesn't seem to hear her. He's telling us about how he had tuberculosis as a boy, and how he almost died. After he got over the worst of it, he still had to stay in bed for a very long time. Running a low-grade fever for months, he discovered the Count of Monte Cristo. This is when he learned to love books. I drift off, thinking about that cozy feeling, the warmth from a fever before it gets high enough to make you shiver. When I was 8 and got the chicken pox, Mom never left my side. She read to me and fed me soup. I remember looking at her through my crusted-together eyelashes and thinking she was the most beautiful person I had ever seen. I recognize that look in Cronus now when he looks at me, purring and squinting. Dennis puts his cigarette out and closes the window. "Tell us more," Mae says.
"Okay,"
Dennis says.
"What do you want me to tell you about?"
Since Mae is too scared, I ask, "Tell us about how you met Mom." On the rare occasions that Mom talked about this, I always felt like I was missing something important. These were the facts as I knew them. Dennis had known Mom since she was a child. He married her when she was 17, and eventually he left her. Left us. But why? And what had he done to her to make her the way she is? I want to hear him tell it.
"How I met her or how I fell in love with her. Those are two different stories," he says.
They had loved each other? This hadn't even occurred to me. He sits on the edge of my mattress, and I scoot back into the wall to balance his weight. He closes his eyes.
"I'll tell you how I met her. She was 9, I think. 9 or 10. I didn't know much about kids, but I could tell that she was special. Already a fully formed person. And so smart and kind and perceptive. And disarmingly sweet. Her father, Jackson McLean, was a friend of mine. What an amazing human being. He took me and my friends into his home and nursed us back to health after we'd been attacked, and that's when I met your mother."
Attacked how? I have only a vague idea. He tells us about how he joined the Freedom Rides to desegregate the interstate highways in the South. He'd gone with his friend Fred, who was black, and they'd driven together to Chicago from New York and boarded a Greyhound bus with the other members of a student group they'd been a part of. The first bus driver refused to take them, said he didn't need that kind of trouble. They eventually got another driver, but outside of Lafayette, the bus was stopped by a white mob. Dennis and the other passengers were dragged off the bus and beaten, and the bus was set on fire. Remnants of the bus are in a museum now in Mississippi. Fred was beaten so badly he lost an eye. He lost the use of it. Dennis was beaten too. His front teeth were knocked out with a bicycle chain. My grandfather had been a medic in the war. He scooped up Dennis and Fred and the others and took them to his house in the woods, where he patched them up as best he could. Of course, this didn't make him popular with the neighbors. Mom was teased a lot at school. A boy held her down while some older girls cut her hair. All the while, the teacher watched and egged them on. He describes her coming home with her hair hacked off and how she tried to pretend that she'd wanted the girls to do this to her, that it had been part of a game they'd all been playing. And then my grandfather had evened it out and Dennis gave her a big magnolia blossom to put behind her ear and told her that she looked beautiful, just like a silent film star. I'm waiting for Dennis to say something, some combination of words that will work like a spell, that will make what happened to our family make sense. But the more he talks, the further away I feel from understanding anything.
People were doing such horrible things. It was easy to feel like the world was a hopeless place. When Marianne was around, though, even the angriest and saddest people felt a little less angry and a little less sad, he says. The ugly woman in the other room puts on a record too loud, then lowers the volume. It's a singer Mom plays sometimes, a woman who sounds like her throat is full of splinters. But Dennis, I start. I want him to skip ahead, get to the part when they are in love. Please, call me Dad.
He interrupts me.
Could you?
For a moment, I don't say anything. The song coming from the other room seeps in. Why not take all of me, can't you see? I'm no good without you. Take my lips, I want to lose them. Take my arms, I'll never use them. No, I finally say. I don't think I could. I feel Mae kick the mattress above me, like she's warning me, but I don't care.
Okay, he says, standing up. Fair enough. I won't rush you.
The mattress creaks as it releases him. The music playing in the other room stops. Good night, Dad, Mae says. I hear him kiss her goodnight, a loud smacking sound. Then he squats next to me and looks for a moment intensely into my face, like he is trying to read my thoughts. It makes me shy and I look away.
Good night, darling,
he says, and squeezes my shoulder. Finally, I hear the woman in the living room say, as Dennis shuts the door. Mae tosses angrily in the bed, making a lot of noise as she gets comfortable. Dad? No, I don't think so. Sorry, Mae. You can toss till you fall off the bed. I'm not calling him that.
Dennis Lomax's Journal, 1961. This morning, Jackson McLean made us grits. A bunch of us have broken teeth, so grits are about all we can manage. Grits and milk. The adrenaline is still pumping, which is why I don't feel the pain fully yet. Yesterday was as close to death as I've ever been. Max is at the hospital in a coma. Fred's eye is swollen shut and his arm is broken, but there are Citizens Council thugs waiting around the Black Hospital. The White Hospital won't treat him. Jackson worked as a medic in the war, so he set Fred's arm himself. He used the plaster from his workshop to make a cast. If Fred asked Jackson's daughter to draw something on it, she's shy, but she took out a paint set and is drawing what looks like a three-headed cat. She says we're not to look until she's finished. She sticks her tongue out and breathes loudly through her nose when she's concentrating. I like watching her work because she's so absorbed in it, so serious. When I look at her, I'm able to not think about last night, or at least to not think about it for long. Faces through the flames like jack-o'-lanterns. And then I'm back in Jackson's kitchen where the curtains are drawn, and where his daughter is painting on Fred's broken arm, turning something horrible into something beautiful. I will try to walk to the gas station this afternoon to call my sister. Jackson doesn't have a phone and his neighbors are not sympathetic to our cause. That is how Jackson puts it. He's careful not to badmouth his neighbors. They're no different than anywhere else, he says. I hope he's wrong. Even with all the chaos in the house, Jackson still manages to escape into his studio and paint every day. What's my excuse for not writing? I try to keep notes, but I can't seem to make them come together into anything intelligible. Letter from Dennis Lomax to Professor Fred Jones, April 17, 1997. Dear Fred, it was good to hear from you. It's been too long. We have quite a bit of catching up to do. Diane told me that you were made department chair. Congratulations. As for my giving a lecture this spring, it seems unlikely. Everything is on hold at the moment because my daughters have come to live with me. I believe when you met them, Edie was in diapers and Mae was gestating. Well, despite my absence from their lives, or maybe because of it, they have turned out to be quite lovely, almost adults. You'll see for yourself. You'll be flying in for the Freedom Fighters book party, won't you? As for your graduate student, things here are a little crazy. But tell her that I'm flattered, and that she should feel free to get in touch. I'll try to be as helpful as I can. Not sure I can tell her anything very useful about my own work, but I'll do my best. Keep on keeping on, right? Dennis.
Edith, 1997.
I'm standing on the threshold to Dennis's room. His door is ajar, but it feels like an invisible velvet rope is holding me in the hallway. He'd gotten a phone call from some woman, and based on his responses full of false modesty, it appeared that she was flattering him. When he finally hung up, he told us he'd be right back. It's the first time he's left us alone since we got here, and it's true. When the front door closed behind him, I felt a surge of panic. Gone again? I didn't look at Mae. I didn't want her to see that I cared. It's ridiculous. No, of course I don't care. I feel freer with him gone, without him following me around, watching my every move. I push open the door to his bedroom. I can imagine it recreated in a museum somewhere, on display next to that piece of burnt-out bus. The writer at work. Look, his unmade bed where he sleeps and dreams. An empty glass with a moldy lemon wedge. And that enormous desk with the typewriter. The very typewriter that he uses to type. I put my finger on the letter D, watch the metal arm slowly rise and fall back down before it touches the blank page. I take a seat in his chair and roll myself forward. Dear Dennis, I begin typing invisibly. Did you ever think about me? I don't know why I'm doing this. I stand up and slam a few keys at random. The metal arms tangle together, catch in midair. Good. I leave them like that. There's an ashtray on the windowsill. A cigarette burnt down to the filter. I touch it with my finger, and the column of ash collapses into a pile. There's another cigarette in there, half-smoked. I pick it up and look at myself holding it in the window's reflection. I put the unlit cigarette to my lips and inhale. Sometimes, I'd wake up and find Mom sitting on the porch, smoking in the dark. I'd want to come sit by her, but I knew better than to bother her. When you have a mom like our mom, you develop an instinct for this sort of thing. Bother her too much, and she'll leave. Where does Dennis keep the matches? I called to Mae. Maybe in his desk? One desk drawer is filled with used-up pens and paper clips. The other one is locked. I jiggle the handle, try to pry it open with a pen. It doesn't work. Then I take a paper clip and untwist it. I saw a girl at school do this one time, though I don't know how exactly. The paper clip jams in the lock. Mae, help me in here. Where is she, anyway? I'd think she'd be curious. Mae? I start again, but then something clicks and the drawer slides open. No matches. Papers. For a second, I think, what if he's been writing to us this whole time, but never sending the letters, and they're all stacked here, neatly in this drawer? How dumb is that? Of course there are no letters. It's a manuscript. I start skimming it, but then put it back. Who cares what it says? I haven't read any of his novels, so why start now? I'm about to close the drawer when something glossy catches my eye. A photograph. I pull it out from between the pages. It's a picture of Mae from a few years ago. Black and white, not one I've ever seen before. She's looking at the person behind the camera with the kind of smile Mae only uses on special occasions. She's wearing a weird dress. It's plaid and has a round collar. I don't know where she would have gotten it. A thrift store? Was it from Halloween? No, I would have remembered it. And that fountain behind her, it doesn't look familiar either. Where was it taken? The photo is bizarre, totally bizarre. It's just like her to have this secret life. She would say that Mom took her places when I was sleeping, but I never believed her. And how had Dennis gotten the picture? She must have sent it to him. So they had been in touch before we came here. For how long? Mae, I call as I go into the living room, holding the evidence. But Mae isn't in the living room. The front door is ajar, and I can see Cronus standing in the empty hallway, tail up, paw lifted. He looks back at me and twitches his tail. Amanda. The first time I met Dennis Lomack was at a basement Italian place across the street from where I was staying. I was a PhD candidate at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, writing my dissertation on his work. My advisor was an old friend of Dennis's, back from their civil rights days together, and he'd helped me arrange the meeting. I got there early and was so nervous that I drank 2 glasses of wine to calm myself down. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the sense of familiarity I had with him because I knew his books so well, but I felt an instant connection. Appearance-wise, Dennis was not what I'd expected. He was older than the pictures on his book jacket, and bigger. Not fat, but tall and broad-shouldered. He had a beard. He was less handsome, but I think that was also what made him more attractive, more brutish. Next to him, Barry looked like a pencil neck wrapped in corduroy. Barry was the graduate student I was engaged to back home. I remember the first thing I thought when I saw Dennis. After, "Holy shit, that's Dennis Lomack," and "I hope my teeth aren't stained purple from the wine I've been swilling," it was, "Barry and I are over. Done." I'm sure that realization would have come on its own eventually, but seeing Dennis sped it up. I'd prepared a long list of questions, but I didn't quite know where to start. I mentioned how I had been trying to track down the original of his Russian folktale translations with no success. It's funny because as I was saying it out loud, it finally occurred to me that there was no original source material. In retrospect, it seems pretty obvious. I asked Dennis Lomack about that, and he shrugged and said that he might have taken some liberties. He asked me how I had gotten my hands on the book at all, seeing as it had come out with a tiny press with a tiny print run. I told him Professor Fred Jones had been very generous with his personal archives. I asked him if he had written the story when his ex-wife was pregnant with their first child. The date of the publication seemed to indicate this as a possibility. He took a sip of his drink and didn't say anything. "Was the story prophetic?" I asked him. "In what sense?" He put his hand down on the table, close enough to mine so I could feel the heat off of it, but not quite touching. "Did my wife become a witch? Did she eat our children?" His voice was low, hypnotic, patient, but not. He was straining to keep things light. "Did having your children change her? Did she love you less afterward? Did you want her to get rid of them, to help her return to who she used to be? And did you say the story was a translation to avoid taking responsibility for your feelings? For these implications?" I had no experience interviewing people. The whole thing was preposterous. I'd used up my entire summer stipend to fly to New York and stay in a by-the-week motel in Midtown, purely in the hopes that Dennis Lomack would meet with me. I tried to seem casual and told him I was visiting an aunt, but I had no aunt. I was only there to see him. And after begging my advisor to put in a good word, 10 minutes into the meeting, I managed to botch it all completely. Dennis Lomack held the silence long enough for me to feel my missteps, but I think at that point my questions had crossed over from uncomfortable to so absurdly inappropriate that the equilibrium of power was again restored in his favor. He must have felt sorry for me. "Fred didn't tell me your dissertation was on my ambivalence around having children," he said after a while. My dissertation was about anachronistic temporalities across Lomack's novels and essays, viewed through a Foucauldian lens. Or, that is what it was going to be about. I never finished it. At that point in my life, the thing that really interested me was exactly what I had been asking him about. How would having children change a person? Or, more specifically, how would having children change me? I was 2 months pregnant and had not told Barry. As we were leaving, I remember Dennis Lomack helped me into my jacket. My arm got momentarily stuck in the sleeve, and I remember standing with my back to him and feeling a rush of excitement at the thought that I was trapped, and that I could feel what I imagined was his breath on the nape of my neck, like the scene in his book with Cassandra. When I turned around, though, he wasn't even facing me. He was turned away, looking up at something in the window. Mae. The first time Dad left us alone at the apartment, I followed him. I waited for him to get a block ahead, like Mom had taught me. In those days, Mom was always with me, whether I wanted her in my head or not. I could feel myself descending into a trance, and even though my body was on the street, following Dad, my mind was being trampled. She knew how to draw my attention to all the things that were ugly. A hypodermic needle, a man peeing, a woman talking to herself. She had me convinced that Dad was meeting with someone in order to discuss sending us away, even though I knew this wasn't the case. I was so relieved when Edie appeared by my side. Once she was there, my mother's grip on me loosened, and I could pretend that my sister and I were running down Broadway on a fun adventure. It turned out I was right to worry. Dad was meeting with a woman, Amanda, who would eventually prove to be a very troublesome person. They met in a dank-looking Italian restaurant in the basement of an office building, Patronelli's. It doesn't exist anymore. Edie and I kneeled by the ankle-level windows in the alley and watched them sitting at a table with a red and white checkered tablecloth. We watched them slowly eat spaghetti in real time. There was no way for us to hear what they were saying, but it didn't look like Dad was all that engaged by the conversation. When he gestured to the waitress for the check, Edie and I ran back to the apartment, laughing as we ran. Edith, 1997. Mae and I lean against each other trying to catch our breath. Louise the doorman is asleep at his desk with a baseball game playing quietly on the transistor radio.
Nice-looking pitch right there. Curve ball gets the inside corner. Ooh, that's gonna even up the count.
We can ask Louise to let us in, I say between gasps. We should have propped open the door. Louise doesn't stir out the sound of his name. I notice a man standing by the mailboxes, looking at a coupon booklet. Mae shakes her head and jabs several times at the elevator button. No, don't. He'll tell Dad that we went out, she says.
So, we're free to go wherever we want. We aren't his prisoners, I say.
The man is still staring at his coupon booklet.
It must be the most interesting coupon booklet in the world. He's obviously eavesdropping.
Excuse me, Mae calls to him.
He looks up like he's been waiting for this invitation.
I've seen him before. Something is strange about his face. No eyelashes. But as he comes closer, I see that he does have them. They're just the same color as his hair, yellow-white. You live here, right? She asks him. He nods. Oh, God, Mae, what is she about to do? He stops and clears his throat.
In the apartment under yours, he says through his cough. We met the other day. Charlie. He shakes her hand as he coughs into his other elbow.
Can we climb through your window to get to the fire escape? Mae asks.
The elevator doors creak open before I have a chance to contradict her or laugh it off. He's going to think we're freaks. Not that Spooks has ever cared about that. Standing up for her in school was a full-time job. An old woman limps out of the elevator with a balding Pomeranian. We stop talking and wait for her to pass. She moves between us, slowly like a barge, eyes straight ahead. Sure, Charlie says, after the woman has gone, and follows us into the elevator. I'm embarrassed that we've invited ourselves over to his house. I stare down at the floor. Charlie's shoes are the strangest things I've seen. A wetsuit type of material with each toe separated out, like gloves for his feet.
We locked ourselves out, Mae explains.
Of course. It happens, he says. He pauses between his words, like he's swallowing air. His apartment is the same layout as ours, but feels smaller. All of the furniture has been pushed to one end of the living room and stacked to the ceiling. Wooden tables with doilies, ceramic lamps, a plaid couch, a rolled-up rug. It's darker, too, because cardboard boxes are blocking one of the windows. It smells like cigarettes, B.O., peppermint, and something else.
Did you just move in here?
Mae asks, eyeing his boxes. He nods. A few months ago. My grandma used to live here.
A telescope is set up by the living room window. I stop and look through it. The lights are off in the apartment across the street.
There's too much light pollution to see any stars,
he says, and playfully taps the telescope so it swings out of position. I'm not sure if it had been aimed at that apartment on purpose or not.
Can I get you guys...
He stops, swallows, tries again.
Water?
No thanks, Mae says. She's in a hurry. Sure, I say. He fills a mug for me from the tap. The door to the room that's under Dennis's bedroom is ajar. The ground is covered in sawdust. That's what the other smell is. Sap.
That's my woodshop,
he says, handing me the water and pushing the door open all the way. Piles of 2x4s and plywood boards, a table saw.
If you ever want to build anything.
What could I possibly want to build? Mae tugs me toward Charlie's bedroom, the room directly below ours. It's empty, except for a sleeping bag on the floor, a stack of books, a box of tissues, an ashtray, and an Altoids box. I wonder why he doesn't build himself a bed. Mae pushes the window up and crawls out onto the fire escape. Come on, she hisses at me. I'm looking at the books. One of them is by Dennis. Cassandra's Calling. Hurry up. Thank you, I say to Charlie. I pass him back the empty glass and crawl out his window. Through the fire escape steps, I can see his face looking up at us. It's an interesting face. He's definitely a weirdo, but that's not necessarily bad. Help me, Mae says. She's trying to pry our window open. I squeeze my fingers into the crack under the frame and push. Go in a little and then up, I tell her. The window loosens and creaks as we finally get it open from the outside. I scrape my leg on the sill as we crawl back in. It stings. I limp into the living room where Mae is already sitting on the couch, pretending like this is where she's been all night. I sit next to her and we both pant quietly, ready for the sound of the key in the door. A few minutes go by and nothing. I've caught my breath. Maybe Dennis isn't coming straight home. Maybe he's going to that woman's house. What did you think of our neighbor? I ask. Mae shrugs, eyes still on the front door. He seemed fine. I drape my injured leg over her lap and inspect the tiny beads of blood already beginning to clot along the surface of the scrape. Fine or fine? Ew, Mae says, ignoring the question. Stop picking at it. But I've been injured on the job, I drawl, lifting my shin towards her face. How am I going to find a lawyer to get me the settlement that I deserve? Personal injury law, call and response. A game we started when we had to live with the Wassersteins, since those ads played on endless loop in their living room. Mae pulls the scarf off my neck and ties it around my leg like a tourniquet. Why, it's just as easy as picking up the phone, she says dutifully, and then whistles the jingle. Do it in a bow, I say, pointing my toes. You're ridiculous, she says, but ties the ends in a bow. What do you think the Wassersteins are doing at this very moment? Choking on a hot dog, Mae says. Just one? I snort, picturing the two of them gagging on opposite ends of the same hot dog like Lady and the Tramp. Cronus emerges from Dennis's room and stretches. Was that open before? Mae points past our cat to Dennis's door. Oh, right, I say. The photo. I fish it out from my back pocket and smooth it against my thigh. Looking at it now, with Mae beside me, I feel very stupid for having thought it was her. Of course it's not Mae. It's Mom. Obviously it's Mom. I've just never seen any pictures of Mom from when she was Mae's age, and they do look exactly alike. What is that? Mae asks. I pass her the picture. Where'd you find this? She asks. In his desk. She stares at it. I think I saw him looking at it the other day. He must think about her still, she says finally, and makes me put it back exactly where I found it. Then I join her again on the couch, and we wait.
Letter from Marianne Louise McLean to Dennis Lomack. June 14th, 1962. Dear Mr. Dennis, Daddy says long hair or no long hair, it's impolite to call you Dennis. So, now I will call you Mr. Dennis. I went up to the lake yesterday with Cynthia and her little brother, and I saw the burial mounds. I told her what you said about the Indian bones inside. And her little brother, Gus, who is a pain and a half, heard and started to try to dig them up with his hands. He thinks he found an arrowhead, but I think it was just a sharp rock. He kept sneaking up on us and poking the back of our necks with it and telling us we were cursed. Then he got stung by a bee, so I guess he got what was coming. Then we saw girls from our school, and they didn't talk to us. But Cynthia's mom said we just had to keep our chins up, and that we were on the right side of history, and that when those girls grew up, they would be deeply ashamed of what their parents had done to our daddies. Then Cynthia's mom gave us chicken grease sandwiches, and I ate mine and pretended to like it. I think Cynthia was embarrassed. Daddy says you are coming back in September to help register people to vote. I miss you. I miss going on our walks and your stories and having you and all your friends on our living room floor. It was like a slumber party, and there was always someone to talk to. The house is so empty now, and Daddy just paces back and forth. Here is the photo of me you took with Daddy's camera. Don't forget me. Marianne Louise.